Today I'd like to give an introduction to nomology. And nomology comes from two words, nomos, meaning law, which is objective things such as in astronomy and economics and so on. And logos is, a lot of these go back to Aristotle, and so they're words that are sort of come from the Greek, and it generally means reason, but really we understand it as in things like psychology and sociology and ecology and so on. So, objective systems and subjective systems. Sometimes nomology has been called the science of the laws of the mind. Sometimes it's been called general laws about how we reason. But essentially, I see it as the common structures behind both objective and subjective things. And that's really what we're going to focus on. Now, because it's about structures, and we're going to talk about, bones, flesh, and skin, but really it's about the bones. It's about structures. And what are they about? It's about maps. And how do you use a map? If you're going along someplace and you're trying to get to UCD, to the business school, let's say, and you see Cork 10 miles, well, you know you're not there. You're not even in Dublin. So you get to Dublin. When you get to Dublin, then you say, am I here? And you say, well, actually, it's DCU 2 miles. Well, I'm not. I'm on the north side. It should be on the south side. So maps tell you where you're not. So nomology might seem to give the impression that it sort of tells you everything about everything. It doesn't really. It just gives you structures which help you to navigate. Now, we do things from practice. And within the academic world, you've got science, you've got humanities, but you've got practice. We work from practice. So, this has to be good science. It has to be good in terms of humanities because we're talking about how people think and so on. But really, we build the information from what happens in thousands of cases and systems that have been used for a long time in management and in other areas and so on, and in philosophy and history and so on, which provide us with a rich ground for the evidence of nomological laws, how people shape their decisions. So we're not going to get into the whys, but if there's something that is a pattern that is there for a long time and really quite clear, then what we're looking for is the structure behind it. Now, we build the theory using principles and axioms. The idea is that if something applies on a structural level, and it applies universally and in all fields, then it's an inherent thing. It's a principle that is sort of happens generically, or it's an axiom that this is the way people do in certain situations. So one of the great things about being able to do that now compared to even 100 years ago is that with things like Google Scholar, you can actually pick up information about systems from practice and from all fields. So you're not just confined, as they would have been up until 100 years or so ago, about just reading philosophy, because so many different fields have so many different systems. Some of them, and certainly in the management area, they tend to keep this sort of private information. This is how we do things in our company. But now you can get access to pretty well everything that everyone's doing, and you can see how these things work, and then how they work on a structural level and what are the common factors. So we look on decision making as a multifaceted diamond. I talked about bones, flesh, and skin. So the skin is the words that people use in different management situations. They're like the facets, what you see from the outside. So one word in, say, a medical area would be very different from a word in a sports area, but they could actually connect to the same part of the structure. So we're taking in all sorts of aspects, psychology, philosophy, management, and so on. And of course, what we're doing is looking for a holistic approach. So it's a top-down sort of approach. So what I'm going to do is take some areas that are familiar to some people, not to everybody, but certainly which are well worked and well used. I'm going to take 4 or 5 of these and show the underlying systems behind them, and then show how we can take what was done, for instance, in this case, Maslow, and show what the structure is, and then, as in a jigsaw puzzle, maybe fit the pieces. Because remember, what he did here was from empirical work, and he said, well, I notice people have physical level, safety issues, esteem, love, self-actualization. So what we want to know is what is the underlying structure? And of course, because we're doing this from 4 or 5 different areas, we actually know intuitively what the structure is going to be. But I think most people will recognize that you've got a lower level, a middle level, and a higher level. So that's one of them. Another one that's well known is Carl Jung's psychological types: thinking and feeling and sensing and intuiting. And he himself noticed that there were, from a relatively small number of patients, he noticed that some of them were more into intuiting, or some of the others. Now, that didn't mean that he necessarily understood the structure, but he just recognized empirically that there were those differences, and that's important for us. Another one, again, was very popular, maybe 10 to 15 years ago, the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who has her 5 stages of dying. Now, okay, these are stages, and they don't fill the whole structure. They don't need to be comprehensive to be valid, but somebody would, if they had a problem, they were, with facing the fact that they were seriously ill, they might get into denial, then anger, then bargaining, then depression, then acceptance. It got extended beyond that to, it was not just to 5 stages of dying, but to facing serious problems about a health problem, or about alcoholism, or drug addiction, or whatever. And so it actually developed quite a lot. Probably one that is most commonly used, certainly in management, and particularly in systems management, and even more so in information systems, is this systems development life cycle. Some people don't use those terms, but even for students developing a dissertation or doing any kind of project, they would see, well, we do our survey, and then we do our study, then we define what the problem is going to be, then we select some kind of solution, then we design the new system, and then we acquire whatever we need. Now, if it's a computer system, we might be acquiring computer hardware and software. But if it's a dissertation, it might be acquiring data, so as to actually go and then you go on and you do the analysis and so on. So constructing the new system, the computers, but it could be in constructing a solution after your survey, and then delivering to your clients and so on, and then maintaining and improve. So essentially, let's go back to the original structure. The first part is analyzing what you want, and the designing what you'd like to have or what you prefer to do, and then implementing something that you value. So there's a structural link between these. So going down the rows, see, it is phases of committing yourself. So this is definitely what I want, the new project. And it could be a house, but we use an architectural analogy. So you survey the land, and then you study, what is it that the family are looking for, and what they're living in at the moment, and then define what the requirements are. I want to build a house for, 100,000, and they say, well, sorry, it's going to cost you 200,000. Well, you're trying to fit into the requirements, and then you do the design, and then you do the implementation. So it's stages of, or phases of committing. So this is the underlying structure. Running across the columns, we see that it is stages of convincing about what you want, what the analysis or what I want. So there's a survey, and there's a study, and then there's a definition. Now these actually have defined stages. Technically, we need to do a survey. Survey the land, is it really very soft land, or is it hard rock, or if it's computer software, what are the software projects that were there before? in the context of the where it's going to go, you know, who are the clients, who the company, if it's a new building or a new home, you know, who are the family and what are they currently doing. So that's the context of it. And then the situation is how much money do you have and how long is it going to last for? We only need the system for 2 years, or we need a house for 50 years, whatever it is. So technical, contextual, and situational. So these are stages of convincing. Convince me that it's going to be good technically, then it fits the context, and then the situation. Now, let's go on to the next part, which is, having said about a few of these things, we now look at the Maslow hierarchy again and see, can we fit into the structure? And we talk about the low, middle, high, and also we're talking about the convincing structure as well. So what do we mean by hierarchy? Well, if actually we now talk about needs, the low-level ones, preferences, the middle, and higher as in values. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs now becomes a hierarchy of needs, preferences, and values, lower, middle, and high. The other thing is about convincing ourselves about how to get the right needs, satisfy the preferences, and so on. So we had before, for a project, technical aspects, contextual, situation. But actually the technical ones are mediated by oneself. What do we want ourselves? The contextual is about relating to others, and the situational is about fitting it into the world. So we personalize it. So we have slightly different skin for these convincing stages, self, others, and world. And now let's see if we can fit these in. And we can see that the physical one fits sort of well because it's about oneself and its needs and so on. But then the question comes, about the one in red there, the safety. Where does that fit? And is it about others, or is it about world, or is it about both? And can we actually look at the appropriate piece of jigsaw that would fit into there? And it turns out that there are, because needs corresponding to others is more about political needs, you know, the needs for security, to be safe, to, you know, to have the army and police and so on, to be well protected. But then you've got your other needs, which is about developing your economy, your career, and so on, how you're going to be in the world, more economic needs. Now, we can actually look at this in the context of history. If we go back, you know, whatever length of time we're on this planet as human beings, we would have had our physical needs for so long. And we would have been hunter-gatherers and fishermen and stuff like that. But then after a while, if we had a successful harvest and we had a lot of stuff gathered and so on, what would happen? The raiders would come and rob us and so on. So we would want to be able to politically protect ourselves. So we would develop armies and stuff like that. And that went on for quite a long time. And it's only when we got to the industrial and banking revolutions and so on that it would be quite clear that it was a good idea that not to have people either working on farms and fishing or in armies and stuff like that, but maybe you should have specialists, teachers and roofers and builders and fishermen and experts at doing various different things, and using economic abilities so as to develop the country. So that's how the stages 2 and 3 develop out of the needs one. So what about the next level, the preferences? And we see we've got love and esteem there, and where do they fit in? And what does esteem mean? You're esteemed by others, so maybe that connects with that. But what about the love one? What exactly does that mean? And it turns out that in the context of breaking those down, love and esteem, the social one is more relating to the world. Where are you within the world? The cultural, where are you relating to other people and cultures and values in the cultural sense? And then the self one is more emotional. Now, what we're beginning to notice here, and remember that we're talking about something, this kind of hierarchy of levels, which has been there in every culture for tens of thousands of years, maybe hundreds of thousands of years, in the development of language. And notice that in the development of language, independently of any structures that I might be putting on it, it automatically developed in a certain way. And notice physical, political, emotional, cultural, social. The AL at the end. And then you wonder, why? What about this other one, economic? Should it be economical? And then you realize in the development of language, if somebody says that person was economical with the truth, it's being used for another purpose. So language, as it's developed with this, follows rules, but doesn't necessarily follow them rigidly. Anyway, that said, what happens about the top level? What are your values? Maslow had self-actualization here, and then he hadn't anything for the other two. What was self-actualization? Maslow was actually using it about one's personal development. So self-actualization was to make something of yourself. But now we see physical, political, economic, social, cultural, emotional as something to do with society generally, and has a lot of general applications. So maybe we need a word that is like self-actualization, that fits that one, but it also fits all the others. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to drop down the rows from needs to preference to values. So values are higher level stuff. But also we want something that more relates to self, physical, emotional. So what's a higher level thing that more relates to yourself? Now, if you were looking at this on a video, I would suggest that you stop it at this point and just leave it, go away and think about it and see, could you guess what it is? Because when you see it, it's going to be obvious. But if you have tried it yourself beforehand, it's going to be quite interesting to see how it fits. Anyway, moving on. The actual term is artistic. So what is it? It's a self thing. It's about values. It's about implementing your life. Self-actualization actually is being artistic with yourself. You are creating yourself in some sort of way. Notice that it's not artistical, because even that, like economical, is this odd sort of thing. That person's very artistical. You know, it's almost like a slang. What about the last two? One of the things to notice about this is that it's about the development system. So developing yourself. So the last two are actually the final two. So it's like this is a jigsaw where we know all the structures. We know 7 of them. What are the last 2 to actually complete this? And if you've caught on to the idea, then you'll fit them in fairly easily. If not, then maybe go away and have another think about it and then come back. Anyway, moving on. The last 2, religious and mystical. So the first one, the religious one, raises its own issues because we are in Ireland in a post-religious society where religion has got a bad name. Ironically, in a place like China, which officially doesn't have any religion, but it tolerates them because they stabilize society in some sort of way, they're actually very religious people, and that they do so much for their family, and if somebody dies, and that they will respect them, and they will, you know, pray that their ancestors are safe, and so on. So if religion has got a bad name, maybe we should look at a redefinition of what religious is about. It certainly isn't about politics, and you know the way there are religious disputes by religious people who are involved in political disputes, telling people what to do, and even in culture, telling people what they should think and so on, and you know, religion, cultural practices as religion. So if you go to the Bible and say true religion is about helping your neighbor, it's about helping the person who's sick or visiting in prison or whatever. So one of the things that nomology does is it helps to give us a new look at some of these words that have maybe slipped away from their true value. The last word, mystical. We associate mystical with being somebody up on the top of the Himalayas, you know, maybe listen to some guru and tell him to be mystical and be calm and get nirvana or something like that. Actually, in this context, mystical activity is just one of 9 levels of activity that everybody should do. The only difference about this one is that it's a part of the map or the jigsaw which is not the other things. So if somebody is just standing on a beach looking out at the sea and admiring the waves and looking at the sky and admiring the way the clouds are going across, that's a mystical activity. It's not doing the other things. It's actually getting very calm and very sort of happy and peaceful in oneself. So let's now go to some of the other ones that we had. Carl Jung, who developed psychological types, and see how does it fit the structure, and can we do some jigsaw piece filling with this one here. And one of the things about it is that he set it up as a 2x2, and that's what it was. But actually, if you read towards the end of his writings, towards the end of his life, and this was quite famous, he was actually saying that, well, he thinks that when he presented this, there was a missing dimension of memory, which is the outside one of the convincing. And also, he thought there was a missing dimension of will, which is the high level of commitment. So it's interesting that he was reflecting on this, because a lot of people have used this for Myers-Briggs, for personality types, or different forms of personality types, and you know this thing, INTJ, and things like that, and so on. And a lot of people will use, you know, this for personality typing, but it would appear that this is an incomplete jigsaw. So can we look at this in the context of the structure? First of all, intuiting thinking is kind of a bit lower level than the feeling and sensing. So maybe that's more lower level. So actually the terms there that were developed, soma, psyche, pneuma, were developed in the 19th century by people who were developing some ideas about nomology, and really the only term that survived from that was the psyche. Soma is for body, is a Greek word for body, psyche for soul or mind, and pneuma is a Greek word for spirit. And there's some interchange in between these, but the point about it is that this word psyche really did ring a bell, and people got a lot of interest in psychological things and so on. So soma, more tangible stuff, pneuma, more high-level stuff. And so that's the first one. Levels are phases of committing. And actually, the words introvert and extrovert came out of here as well. So introvert is more into oneself. And so these things merge as one part of the structure. The other part was more extroverted and convincing, so more relating to other people or relating more to yourself. So self, others, and world. And certainly intuiting and feeling seem to relate to self, whatever about thinking and sensing. Looking at that, thinking and feeling were a bit more general than intuiting and sensing. So maybe actually they should be names for the more generic one. So generically or generally, we've got the thinking phase and then a feeling phase. And then within that, you've got this intuiting and sensing. And the question is, if we start in this jigsaw puzzle with intuiting, where does it go from there? The 2 question marks, stages 2 and 3. What comes after that? What's a form of intuiting? If I have an intuition about something, it's something that I feel myself. But if I want to develop my thinking about something and relate it to others, what am I doing? And if you're thinking about a project, I've got an intuition that I need to get a new computer, or I need to change the bit of software, or I need to improve this project. What do I do next? Well, I look at what others have done in this thinking process and maybe recognize that this is what people generally do. If the laptop is not working, they get a new one, or if the software is out of date, they improve it or rewrite it, and they recognize that it's time to do that. And what about the third one? And remember that this is a convincing process, so the process is over after 3 stages. So intuiting, recognizing, what's a third one that goes after that, that completes that process? And it's also, we talked about technical, contextual, situational, then about self, others, and world. Now it's more, I'm getting involved in something that's my intuition. I'm protecting others, or recognizing that we should look after the company or the family, whatever it is. And then the last one is observing the world. So it's the third one here is believing. This is what I believe is the right thing for the company, for myself, for my beliefs, for the economy, whatever it is. So intuiting, recognizing, believing. Notice also the intuiting, recognizing, believing, the same ending. We're still thinking, feeling, sensing. What about the next level down, and where do we do it? And we're still working on the basis of involving and self for the first one, and then protecting and others for the middle one. Where does sensing? Well, actually, the sensing one is more about a world thing. You know, I sense that this is the right way to go, that the future is with, you know, maybe it's not with mainframe computers, it's with, you know, iPads, iPhones, and so on. And so sensing the way things are going in the world. So maybe that's what fits there. And again, when we're doing this, we're not necessarily getting the right piece in the right place in the jigsaw initially. And I'm showing this because we've done it over a period, but when you're doing this for the first time, you move them around to see what is right. So what comes after this? If we're going to try and fit this in, what comes after stage 4, sensing, which relates to others, which also drops down from stage 2, recognizing. So it's a combination. It's like as if you've got 2 pointers, sensing going to the next one and recognizing working down. And also there are similar words. And the answers are sensing, learning, and trusting. So you learn within the context of others, what you sensed was a good idea for the world, and which you recognize was a need, you then learn how to put it together. So it's combining the two. So in doing this form of filling this jigsaw puzzle, we're sort of coming from 2 angles. The same with the next one, sensing, learning, trusting. For a start, it's the third of 3. It's a psychological area. It is more focused on the individual, myself. Do I trust this person? Do I trust this software? Do I trust my data, that I got the right data? It's like believing in the sense that it's a completed phase. Okay, so if we want to move then to the third layer, now we're going to do the same sort of thing. We're going intuiting, trusting, to what? What goes after that? So, and again, it's technical. So I have an intuition that this machine is broken. I trust the documents and the technical advice that I have, that I'm on the right track. But what if I really was very, very good at it? What would I have which is beyond intuiting and trusting? It's experiencing. The person who has experience really can deliver the thing, really knows, is the expert in constructing something, getting it right. What about moving onwards? Doing the same thing, filling in the gap from experiencing onwards and learning downwards. The person who delivers something for clients and so on, who really is an expert in not just technically, but in working with others. It's understanding. And known as all of these, the same ending, is there a word that fits into the last of these, which completes the whole process. In this case, it's a realizing. And in a way, it's the summary of all of them. It's bringing something to realization, it's making it real, it's being realistic, it is facing reality. It's a complete version of all of these. So if you were to use only one of them, you'd say, I need to be realistic and to realize this project. So what's left here to do? On the left-hand side, we had thinking and feeling coming from Carl Jung. Have we got something that fits? And again, we're talking about a jigsaw piece that fits into there, that synthesizes experiencing, understanding, and realizing. Again, because a lot of this is, it's a lot to take at any point, a good idea would be to stop now and then come back in a little while and say, could I have really worked out what this would be? And actually, if you think of it, thinking, you think, and then you feel, and then you know. You know it is the fully committed one. Yes, I know what I'm doing. I know what this is about. So it's complete. Okay, let's move on to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her 5 stages of dying. But now remember, okay, it's a very well-known system in some areas, in therapy and so on. It's in a very different field, which makes it interesting from a nomological point of view, because we want to show that things are really coming from many different backgrounds and factors and so on that reflect the same structure. How does it fit the structure? Well, we've got the lower level ones of denial and anger, and then we've got middle level ones of bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So can we do something to do this in terms of looking where the structure is? Now that we know it, we know we've got thinking, feeling, and knowing. Okay, so you've got the thinking issues and the feeling issues, and we leave the knowing for the time being. And then we've got the more extroverted ones, the self and the others and the situation. Okay, so maybe the self one, I accept the problem. The others one, denial and depression, I deny, and it really started off with somebody who was dying, but it's more often probably now applied to alcoholism. So people want to deny that the problem is happening and so on. One word stands out there as being not consistent, and one of these things is that we need consistency: denial, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Anger, it's a very, very strong word, and maybe it's an inappropriate word fitting into this context. So is there a word that might fit that instead? And where does that resonate with the word anger? Well, for those of you who remember the 7 deadly sins, anger was one of the 7 deadly sins. And okay, I've done this, but it is an exercise that you might do, which is to try and fit those 7 deadly sins into these phases and stages of this structure. But if you remember and you can see how I've done it: pride, anger, covetousness, lust, envy, and gluttony, envy, and sloth. How I did that was the gluttony and envy, it's more individualistic, it's more myself. Pride, lust, and sloth is more about relating to others. And the anger is, I really don't like that situation. And the covetous, I want something more in my own situation or in the world. I like a bigger car and something like that. And a lot of the people who are going through these stages of dealing with facing alcoholism or dying or something like that would say, well, I'll think about it if I've got a nice car to make me feel happier or something like that. So anger in there fits. Notice another thing about this. As we were told them, pride, anger, covetous, lust, gluttony, envy, and sloth, they actually are here in the sequence in which we were told them. So when this was learnt originally, the actual sequence was there as corresponding the stages or levels, if you like. 7 deadly sins, but 2 missing. What are those 2? So instead of thinking in terms of extreme things to do with sin and stuff like that, just see it in terms of something a little bit milder, like a project that's going badly or something like that, and you don't want to do something about it. What comes before pride? What comes after sloth? And the ones that come before pride are complacency, where somebody says, and it's unfortunately it's happened to a lot of people who said, yeah, I have these breathing problems, or I have these issues where I feel out of breath suddenly when I'm going uphill and so on. And they say, I must see a doctor maybe in a few months' time or next year or whatever it is. And they get complacent. So it isn't a case of pride, which is, well, I've been such a good person at sport for so long, nothing could happen to me. It's more a case of they didn't notice the warning signs. They were complacent. And what about the last one, the ingratitude? Well, for many projects, people got a lot of help, whether it's dealing with illness or whether it's dealing with building systems or projects or software or whatever it is. And at the end, when they say, oh yeah, well, that's done. And there's no sense of completing the project as in being grateful for it and going back and thanking everybody. So the project becomes hanging there in a slightly incomplete residue in your mind, whereas it would be better if you actually express the gratitude about all the help that you got. So 7 deadly sins extended to 9 so as to take the word anger out. So what about in Kubler-Ross's stages of dying, which now we're calling stages of relating, because this isn't just about dying, it's about many different things, including dealing with projects and dissertations and whatever it is. So now, a more appropriate word that fits into denial, bargaining, acceptance, and depression, the word is upset. You know, I'm upset about this because the project's not going right. And what about the first stage? What should it be before that? And after acceptance, what about those? So the first stage, the one before denial, is confusion. I don't really know what's going on here. I used to be able to run uphill very quickly, and now I don't really know. Maybe I'm getting older, or maybe it's a problem, but maybe I need to do something about it. Nothing seems to be exactly right. Or maybe I know that my software, my computer isn't working that well, or I really don't know the theory that well. Maybe I'm just a bit confused. So it's a pre-stage to getting the project going. After confusion, working down. After bargaining and depression, working across. What is it? Which is a feeling that you don't want to get into implementing, into knowing what you've got to do. But you had this feeling, I have to do it, but I don't feel like it. So let's go over them again. You're confused, and then you have out of confusion. And then the denial one. As often happens with the first stage of dealing with the stage of dealing with denial is where maybe if somebody's got an alcohol problem, you get people around, all their friends, to actually bring them through the denial stage. Frequently the upset stage is where somebody is seriously in a hospital and you go in to visit them and they get upset. Some people say, oh no, don't get upset. Why are they saying that? They're saying, don't get upset because I don't want to get upset. I'm your visitor and I don't want you to be annoying me. Whereas in fact, the upset is a stage. They're beginning to get an inkling, a small realization that they have a serious problem. And you should respect their upset, that they're allowing themselves to get upset with you. They're sharing their upset, and they need to be brought through that. It's the third stage of a 9-stage process. What happens next? The bargaining stage, where if I got a fancy big car or something like that, then I might be able to face this. Then after that, the depression stage is where I can't face it. I have a problem. Other people don't have it. It's my problem when I relate to others. And so I get depressed about it because I have to face it. After that, relating to yourself, the inertia is, I know I'm out of depression, but I have no energy and I have no will to do anything about it. I just want to, curl up in a ball. Now, what is the next one, stage 7? And remember with the 7 deadly sins, which we now see are 9, the terms there, they were envy, sloth, and ingratitude. One is a term corresponding to envy, which is beyond inertia, which is at the higher level. You're starting to do something and relates to yourself. Some of these are difficult to fit, and again, if you were to take a break and come back to it, then you might see. But the term here is jealousy. So jealousy, I have an illness, I haven't really sorted it out, and I'm jealous. This other person who lives down the road from me, he's not a nice person, and he's got a nice car and a nice house, and he's not ill. That's not fair. That's the jealousy one. Now the envy one, and again, in words in terms of this sort of thing between, Nomology tries to help people with, to differentiate and distinguish words carefully. What's jealousy versus envy? People use the words interchangeably. I am jealous about a specific thing. I'm envy in a more general, deeper way. Now, envy is I prefer to be you. I'm jealous of what you have. I'd like to have what you have. I'd like to own it myself. So what comes after jealousy? You're no longer jealous. You're dealing with your own problem and so on. You have to go and implement it. It's compliance. If you have to go and take your medicine, then you take your medicine. If you have to go and deliver the project to other people, then that's what's meant to be done. You do whatever is necessary. If you have to become a non-drinking alcoholic, that's compliance. You just go along with it. And what about the last one? Working through 9 stages of relating to something very difficult, the last one is enthusiasm. And people say, how could you get enthusiastic if you're dying? If you visit a hospice, you'd be amazed at how they give people so much care. People who recognize that they're dying, the pain is managed, there's comfort, they've got their will, and everything is sorted out, and they're actually happy that everything is in good order, and even enthusiastic about life, what is left for them, and about moving on. So the last stage of relating to a project is to be enthusiastic about it. Okay, so moving on to bring this onto the systems development life cycle, dealing with a project, which we saw the survey, the study, definition, select how you're going to go it, design the new system, acquire the hardware and software, construct it, deliver, and then maintain and improve. How are these in terms of the phases? Well, we're using a few words together. You analyze what you think you want. You design what you feel you should get or you prefer. Implement what you know you value. Okay, what about the convincing stages? Okay, self and technical stuff and relating to others who may be stakeholders. If this is a project that you're doing for a company, and then the world aspect, well, it's more the business one. So slight changes in those because of the context. So this, what you're doing is, if you take, for instance, the stakeholders one, is you're studying the current system that's used in the business at the moment, then you're designing a new system which is building on that, then you're delivering the new system to the people that are there. In the business world, you're defining the requirements within the budget that you've got, you're selecting a solution from the candidate solutions, say, what is available, which fits into the budget, and then maintaining and improving. Let's look at what these are now at a deeper level nomologically. The first phase, it's purely subjective. What you subjectively want yourself, what others want or subjectively feel, and then what you subjectively feel will work within the world. What about the next levels down? It's a different phase. So what is actually fitting within there? It's more objective, and you're designing. Now, what you feel is appropriate, you would actually have no idea. You can't say you know what is appropriate, but you have some idea of what it is. What you want is what you feel will work objectively within the world. Then in terms of the others, the leaders and the mentors who are in your company. And then you yourself dealing with the project itself. And what about the implementation, the last phase? What is actually, who are the people that are involved there? Well, there's the constructor, you are constructing the thing. And then there's the client, and then there's the beneficiary. So you're delivering it to the client, but the client is the one who's delivering it to the beneficiary. So when you're doing that, you have to construct knowing that the client will want it, but knowing that the client will be delivering it to the beneficiaries. This is some interesting implications, because what if the technology has changed or some new piece of software has come out, in the context of you building this project for 2 years, and it turns out that a month ago something is different and changed considerably. You have to be prepared to go back, to cycle back to earlier stages and do some redesign or resurvey, restudy or whatever. Now, notice that within this, at the top we've got convincing and evincing stages. Actually, let's look at the order in which it is. Survey, study, define. It goes technical or self, context or others, and situational world. Look at the next one. It goes backwards in what I call evincing. You're drawing it out, you're working back. So you're selecting what fits into the world, then you're seeing what the people would be happy with, and then you're working out how you can construct what would work. So convincing, the start of it is you're committing yourself to what you want to do. That's the first stage. Then you're convincing others. Then you're developing within the world. So what are these next stages? You're adjusting what you're going to do within the world. Then you're adjusting the project to suit others. We call it adjusting others, but it's adjusting the project so as to fit what the others want. And then you're adjusting yourself, your own approach and your own angle to it so as to get it done. What about the last stage? You've got the thing designed. It's only a case of implementing it. So what are these last 3 stages? It's designed, you know what you want, but things are going to change. You may have to adapt yourself, the construction, with a view to what is going to be delivered to the client, with a view to what is going to be delivered to the beneficiary. So you adapt yourself fitting into the project that will work best, and then you adapt how you're going to deliver it to others, the clients, the customers, and all that sort of thing, so as to fit it and map it best to them. And then finally, the last one is the reducing world, as in you reduce it, you strip it back down. It's like in cooking, they will talk about reducing a sauce. If there are any problems left, you work all the way down, reducing, and see, what is that problem? Oh, there was a change in software. Okay, let's reduce it right down to that, and let's deal with all those aspects. So you reduce the whole thing down to anything that is left. And this is the maintain and improve, because the project, when it's finished, is hopefully, whatever sort of project it is going to last for some period, and you want to ensure that it will continue for some time. So maintain and improve may actually mean making small changes. So how does this look in the context of this? It's 4 layers are embedded, but we're really talking about the top 3 by 3, the committing and by convincing. And so the very top row of that is at the top of this circular diagram, committing self and then convincing others, and then synthesized into developing world. Then when you go down to the design, which is the middle row, it's you go to adjusting world, and then adjusting others, and then adjusting self. And then after that, the implementation, it's adapting, it's going, if it start off going clockwise in this, committing self, convincing others, adjusting self, it goes back the other way, adjusting self, adjusting others, and then finishing with developing world. Underneath it, you've got these adjusting aspects which are embedded underneath that. So essentially, that's an introduction to nomology. It mainly has been done before in philosophy. These are some of the people, Tappan and Hamilton, mainly in the 19th century. Others have done it back in the 12th century, which is quite interesting that it was that far back. In the 20th century, it was done by Cronbach and Meehl in psychology, and it's used for construct validation. It didn't really work out that well because psychological laws are too uncertain to ensure reliability and usability of laws in the social studies areas, so it kind of ran out of steam. As I've said at the start, we do this in management practice, and we have so much evidence. I mean, we've now carried out many applications, strategic applications, multi-criteria applications, hundreds of them. And we now have studied hundreds of management systems. Most big companies that are there quite a long time will have many different management systems, many of which are known that one would know about, whether it's Six Sigma or Plan, Do, Check, Act or whatever it is. So what we've done is we gather them all together and really built this big jigsaw puzzle, or series of jigsaw puzzles, because the names are slightly different, and then did a lot of cross-linking and drawn it all together. So the fields which this is applied, they're all over the place. Many intercultural fields, conflict resolution, strategy, multi-criteria decision making. And here are some of the websites in which you can see some of these things. It's an ongoing field. I'm very interested in working with people who have developed some of these things. And it's the start of a very new field, which I think really couldn't have been done without the access to multiple cases and to multiple journals, and particularly if you're working in an academic context where you can get electronic access through Google Scholar to many different journals. It's quite possible to do this work really, really well. And what will we have at the end? We will help people with their internal maps. You can see that a lot of this was quite complex. But when you see it as a map, then you don't have to hold all the parts of the map in your mind when you want to work on one part of the map. You can put it out there and you can look at it, and then you can then focus on it and analyze what it is that you want help with. So that's the introduction to nomology, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.